This is WE-Boo-Lesque.
Hello, I'm Penny Slayne, coming to you from Fort Smith, Arkansas. Um, so I was actually born in Mena, Arkansas, which is like south of Fort Smith, and kind of like in the backwoods a little bit. Like there's another town that's north of Fort Smith it's called Alma, and I would consider it like taking Alma and putting it literally in the butt of the woods. But Mena's kind of weird. I feel like it's really quiet, but it's almost like eerie quiet. And the house I actually was born in, my dad, my dad was a nurse, and he always had told me that the house that we lived in used to be used as like, I guess, like a rehabilitation home for like people that were getting like medical stuff done. And because the town was so tiny, they were like transferring people to our house. So I was told that as a kid, which was kind of weird because afterwards, like when I tell you like the initial story, it's gonna be like, that's kind of eerie when you hear about it. Um, but so this is like oddly my first ever memory as a child, and the memory I brought up when I was a little bit older, I brought it up to my mom, like, hey, did this ever happen? And she was like, yeah, that happened. Never told you about it. So my first ever memory as a child, I was actually in my mom's womb, which is weird, but I'm like seeing the instance happen like through her eyes. And like I mentioned, like my dad was a nurse, and so he would work nights because he was a recovery nurse. So he'd be like helping people wake up after surgeries. And so my mom would be home all the time late at night by herself in this house. It was an old Victorian home too, so it's been there for a while. And I just remember very vividly like seeing through her eyes. She's in the bedroom, she gets up, it's the middle of the night, she has to pee, and she's walking to the bathroom. And the way our house is set up, the bedroom's in the very back of the house, and then there's a dining room you have to walk through, and then a kitchen to walk through, and then a bathroom. And like the bathroom's on the other side, very corner of the house. And it being a Victorian home, like you have the high ceilings. And I can see her like walking through the bedroom, the dining room, but right before she gets to the kitchen, there's this black figure, like, and she doesn't panic, but she like feels around and walks around it and just goes to the bathroom, comes back to bed, and didn't really think much of it, went back to sleep, not a big deal. And I was probably about like, probably 3 or 4 whenever I had brought up this whole situation that happened. I was like, did this ever happen? As being a kid, like, did this, And she responded like, yeah, that happened, but I'd never told you about it. And so she was always like, how the heck did she like know that happened? So I always kind of felt like I had some kind of like sixth sense with things because I've had that encounter, which I've never really had like a crazy encounter after that, but I've always felt like energies around me. I have like these dreams where like I call it ass projecting, but I know it's like astral projection. But I feel like I'm like out of my body, and I'll like do stuff like, or just be like floating around my apartment or floating around like places I've been. And then I wake up and I'm like super exhausted. But I have also had like dreams where it's very like simple stuff happening, like stuff at work, or I'm at the grocery store and it's like, oh, I was already doing this. Like, I've done this before, or I dreamt about this thing happening, and now it's happening. So, yeah, I'll usually, like, I'll text her or call her and be like, oh my God, I had the weirdest thing happen. And she'd be like, yeah, yeah, I had something happen similar to me last week. Like, so we usually share whenever we have instances like that.
Hi, my name is Batsy Sinclair. I've been performing burlesque since 2018 in Atlanta, Georgia. I also perform as drag king Thomas Edison, and I started doing drag in 2021. And I grew up in around Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, at which time I lived in a two-story house in the suburbs. And me and my friends and my sisters were also really into paranormal ghost stories and things of that nature. So we decided we were going to have a seance in our basement. And the basement of the house was a kind of on a sloping hill. So the garage was at the back of the house, and there was a door that went out from the basement into the garage. And at the time, the garage was closed, the door was closed, and we were all sitting in the dark in the basement with the door at the top of the stairs closed. I was holding a flashlight, and I was, of course, leading the seance because I was the oldest. And uh, my two sisters and my sister's friend Amy were all holding hands in a circle around me. And I was basing my seance off of um, some words and things that I had found on an old Halloween cassette tape. That was pretty funny. But I, I still remember it was like some stupid, like gibberish, like oatsy boatsy targa and stuff like that. And I tapped the bottom of the flashlight like three times, as you were supposed to, according to this cassette, and then came back into the circle and held hands with my sisters, and we waited. And there was a cold air that kind of came through the room, and I was wearing shorts, so it was very cold on my legs. And it felt like there was like a amorphous blob of light that kind of went through the room a little bit. And Amy said that she felt something. So we abruptly ended the seance because it was just a little bit too spooky for us, and turned on the lights. And Amy was describing this feeling that she had had, felt like a hand on top of her hand stroking the top of it like her deceased grandmother used to do. And also looking around the room, that door that went out to the garage had a uh, two panes of glass window in it, and it was all fogged up, and there was like a handprint in the fog, and we weren't sure whose hand that was, or if it had already been there because of the just people living in the house and stuff, or if that was a ghost, but it felt pretty ghostly. And so we didn't do any more seances after that. I think we tried to once or twice, but it always felt wrong. Like it felt like there was kind of like an evil presence in the basement that didn't want us to do that anymore. Like, didn't want us to close the circle and end the seance because we had let something out, it felt like. And so then we lived in that house for maybe another year or two. And the entire time, I couldn't go in the basement by myself anymore, especially at night. And it just, every time I went down the stairs and it was dark down there, like if the lights were on, it was fine. But if it was dark down there, especially in the evening, it felt like that evil presence was still down there. And I thought about that after we moved several times, like, oh no, what if we like let a ghost in and then whoever moved in there after us had to deal with it? But I guess not my problem anymore. So, um, this feeling of being watched and like something doesn't want you to be there, I felt again when I was living in Savannah, Georgia, which is supposed to be one of the most haunted cities in the country. And I was living down probably around like 54th Street, I want to say. Not too far from the Savannah College of Art and Design animation building, which was a coffin factory before it was an animation facility. Fun fact. But I was living in a house down there, and it had been divided up into three different apartments. The bottom floor was one, and there were a couple guys living down there. And then the top floor was divided in half, and I had one half, and a guy had the other half. So it was mostly just like college kids living in this house. And so whenever you went up the stairs to the second floor, it was two doors, and my door opened to a long hallway with no windows or doors or anything on the left side. But on the right, you had my bedroom, bathroom, another room that I used for art and clothes and stuff like that, and then the kitchen at the end of the hall. And so whenever I lived in this space, I always kind of got that same feeling like something didn't like me being in the kitchen. And that was the strongest part of the house that I felt this presence. And it wasn't all the time, but every once in a while, I'd go in there and I'd try to like make some macaroni or whatever and just get this sense that something was like mad at me. So whenever I would feel that way, I would just go retreat to my room and like maybe go eat my macaroni at the computer, and it would go away. But one day I was in that second room past the bathroom, next to the kitchen, and I was dancing around. I had my headphones in. I was dancing around with my iPod, and just in the middle of a spin, I felt this really strong hatred. And as I spun around, I could see in the open doorway, and it looked like there was a man, a middle-aged guy with brown hair and a kind of, not a large brown beard, but it was noticeably bearded guy, and he was just like glaring at me. Hard to describe his clothes. They were kind of nondescript, and I only saw it for like a fraction of a second. But there was this very angry man standing in the doorway of this room that I had all my art supplies, and I was just dancing around in. And so I, of course, was in the process of spinning. So I finished the spin and immediately looked back at the doorway, and he was gone. But that feeling, very similar to the one in the basement when I was a kid, was still there. Like it just felt like this guy was super angry and didn't want me like dancing around and making a bunch of noise in the house. And so I just kind of scooted back down the hall and went in my room. But I was actually kind of scared because that was the first time I had ever, and the only time I'd ever seen like a manifestation kind of ghost, you know? And I was like, it is Savannah, so I kind of believe it. And after a while, the feeling went away. But I do remember I went back out in the hall after maybe like 20 minutes, and I got that feeling again. I was like, okay, you're still mad at me. I guess I'll go watch Netflix or something. And so that's the story of my ghosts from childhood into adulthood. I used to watch a lot of horror movies and read a lot of books that I probably shouldn't have at that age. Like I was watching Interview with the Vampire in elementary school. Um, so it was actually probably like something like The Craft that introduced me to seances. But I also was reading a lot of scary books and things like that. And I had found this cassette tape of scary noises and just different like stories and things at a Goodwill. And was playing it on my little stereo. And it had like how to do a seance on this cassette tape. And so we were like, let's try it. So, and then it went bad.
Hi, I'm Chichi Peche. I am a local burlesque performer and producer to Salt Lake City, Utah. I've been performing for a little over 8 years now. I have my own show. It's called Birds of a Feather. I've been able to use my costumes and expressions for the community. I've kind of moved around all over the valley, but I grew up in West Jordan, Utah, and that was like my first childhood home, the longest home I ever lived in. And I'd say that I'd like to preface this by saying that I'm not very much of a religious person. I grew up in a very Mormon upbringing. My mom's Mormon, my dad's Catholic. I really, from the time I was young, was very spiritual. I didn't really jive with the constrictions of the Mormon religion or the judgments of the Catholic religion. I was very much born into a weird gray area as spiritual goes. So it kind of shaped who I am as a person, who I am as a performer. When I was younger, I was a lot more open, and I feel a lot more of the activity I experienced was in those years when I was younger. I remember before I lived in West Jordan, I lived with my parents in a duplex in Midvale, Utah, and I would be visited by a spirit or maybe a family relative that would play the guitar on the washer and dryer. And I don't really remember anybody in our circle or who would come in or a family member living that would match this man's description. And he kind of had this weird ethereal aura about him. And I always remember that. And when I asked my mom years later, I was like, I saw this guy on our washer and dryer, playing the guitar. And he had black hair slicked back and it was curly pony. And he played the guitar beautifully. And I always was like, do you know who that was? Was that a relative? Because my grandpa was a mariachi. My dad plays guitar, is a singer. I'm a singer. So it kind of just goes down the line. So I asked my mom, do you know who that guy was? I remember distinctively remember him being in the basement, playing his guitar on the washer and dryer. She told me no. She never recalled anyone playing a guitar in the basement or anybody else but my dad knowing or playing the guitar in the house at the time. But she said that I would reference, when I was younger, a golden boy, which I thought was interesting because I guess in my kid brain, this guy was so alluring and magnetic and had this aura about him. I must have called him, and it didn't really connect the dots until later on that must have been Golden Boy. So that was my first kind of encounter. I wouldn't say I'm psychic. I do have weird experiences that are unexplained, and I just kind of find it significant. I don't exactly know the answer. I don't know if there's a God. I don't know if it's Jesus. I don't know what it is, but I do believe that there is something absolutely divine that kind of loves us and pushes us to do the things we need to on this planet. We are here for a reason. there's been billions of chances and decisions and lines of occurrences that have made it so we can speak to each other and do the things that we need to do and what we believe in. And I'm so grateful I am who I am so I can do that. I'm getting a little older. We move out of the duplex of Midvale and we move into a home, about a 3-story home in West Jordan. My mom and my dad are still together. They have a lot of difficulties staying together in the marriage, a lot of fighting, a lot of alcohol. I think it was that fueled the fighting, was alcohol in the home. And it was a really rough time for me and my sister growing up. But at this time where things were so hectic, it was almost like the house became alive. It was either footsteps running up the stairs, which were really, it was very apparent someone was running up the stairs, but no one would be there. I was getting ready one Sunday morning, curling my hair, and I was going to be going to, I don't know what the Mormons call it. It's like their mass. They have a mass on Sunday. My friend was trying to get me to go because she knew I was kind of conflicted. That's what Mormons do, they want to bring in. So they decided, well, let's bring Chelsea because she's baptized Catholic and she's kind of going through it. So I remember thinking in the bathroom when I was doing my hair, like, is this the right thing? Should I be doing this? This kind of feels weird to me because I'm so conflicted with the Mormon religion because I don't believe in most things they say. So I was really conflicted thinking about this. And in that moment, I hear children whimpering or crying in the downstairs area. So I'm at the top level. I hear it kind of coming from the kitchen, which is ground level. And I go kind of investigate and nothing's there. And so I was like, okay, that's weird. But at the time we had a Native American woman, her name was Lucy, living with us in the basement with her 2 children. So I thought it was them. She's there most of the time, and sometimes the kids are crying in the morning. And so I thought, okay, well, it's Lucy. Something's going on there. I go back to doing my hair and getting ready, and then my mom comes out and she goes, "Do you hear that?" And I go, "I do. I thought it was just Lucy and kids or something." And she goes, "No, Lucy is at her mom's with the kids." And we kind of go investigate. And so we go to the ground level floor, which is the kitchen area, and we realize that this whimpering and this crying of kids is coming from the basement. And it stunned us because we knew Lucy wasn't there. We go investigate, and all we hear is these children crying and a mother or a woman trying to console them, like, be quiet, they're going to hear us. We can hear her say these things like, be quiet, they're going to hear us, you got to stop crying. She's like trying to console them. And it was so distinct. It was like someone was there, some children were crying, and the mother was consoling the children. And it freaked me out. I had a lot of problems being alone in the house after that. I already had some serious anxiety because of everything going on with my parents' separation and just these weird occurrences happening. So I didn't want to be alone after that. That was like one of the major things where it's like, okay, I heard that with my own ears. I'm not crazy. Someone else heard it. And my mom is very more, like, at the time, she was very Mormon and skeptical. And I do believe I have kind of like a bone of skepticism, even though I've gone through these weird things up until I became an adult. And I met my fiance, his name's Callie. We met right after I started burlesquing, and I loved him so much because he accepted me and my art, and he accepted me taking my clothes off for money. And a lot of my family and a lot of my friends and a lot of people that I was around didn't exactly accept that for me, or they didn't want me to be successful. So it was a really breath of fresh air. And it was almost like the universe placed us together to kind of, it just made sense. He needed to grow up, I needed to grow up, and everything was telling us to come together and be a union. And so we did. About a year or two into our relationship, we bought a condo in Sandy, Utah. And that's just kind of like the biggest area of Salt Lake Valley. We loved it. He worked as a grocery through COVID. He was a deli manager, so he worked through it all, and I kind of was just in the bar scene, and I wasn't working, and so we bought this condo together. We thought it would be a really nice step in our relationship. It was going to be a new family. I have a daughter from a previous marriage. Her name's Rose, and we really just wanted to get our lives together. Well, about a year into us living at a condo, Callie suffered a significant stroke. And I remember in the months leading up to it, I was having these anxiety/panic attacks. And I was just like, I would tell him, I was like, I just feel like one of us something's gonna happen. Like one of us is gonna die or something. Like, just relax, you're hitting the blunt too hard, you need to calm down. So I was like, okay, maybe I am. But when this did happen, it reassured me that I do have some sort of weird premonition sense going on, because that's what it was. Once it happened, he was in a coma for about a month. He was non-responsive and he was intubated, and there's no signals that, because they kind of hook you up with a brain monitor. I don't know if you've ever seen all the wires kind of come out. They check the brain waves, and there wasn't a lot happening, and doctors in the ICU told us, all his family and me, that he probably wouldn't wake up. So I was not at this time. I was going through a lot. My grandfather suffered a stroke when I was 10 years old, and he was on that same floor that my husband was on, and he eventually passed away from the stroke. And they kind of said the same thing, like, there's just no response. We wish there was, but he's not improving. And so they pulled the plug on my grandpa, and he died in 2006, I believe. And so at this time, I would come home after being at the hospital all day and just listen to music, because it was kind of my only thing I could do to relieve myself of the stress and the pain of seeing him go through that. And one of the weirdest things is, I knew I didn't want to I usually listen to my favorite songs or my favorite bands, and me and Callie kind of have very like tastes. But in this sense, I kind of use music as a random thing. I just put it on shuffle and just let it play. And I would work on the house, or I was packing it up or getting it ready. And I realized that some of the songs that were coming up were very much like, I will see you again. I am here with you. Like, a lot of these lyrics and a lot of these songs had the same message. And it was like, I will come back. I will be back with you. And one of the songs that would come up, which I really am not a fan of their work, was Wiz Khalifa. And it was like, I will see you again. And I don't listen to that song a lot, but that came up a lot. And I thought that was interesting. And the messages I was getting through from the music was kind of like, the only way out is through. The only way to get through this difficult situation is if we just hold on. So when the doctors and his family members were telling me, he's not responding, he's not responsive, I don't think, like, they were very negative. I was I thought, everybody thought I was in denial, but it was because of these songs and messages that were coming through music that I almost didn't give up, because I knew he would be back and he would be talking to me again someday. That was the message, and it was received. So about a month after being in a coma, his tubes were all taken. He was still in ICU, but right when he had his tube removed, a lot of people who go through that, he went through a double brain hemorrhage. So both sides of his brain stroked. And we found out that Kelly has a rare genetic disorder called moya moya. Moya moya stands for smoke. It means smoke in Chinese. And it represents what the brain vessels in his brain look like. They're clustered and they're small. And when you see them on an angiogram, which is kind of like a CT scan for just your blood vessels, that's what it looks like. It looks like smoke in your brain. So you're very susceptible to stroke because of that. And a lot of people who have moya moya don't have it on both sides of their brain. He does. So he stroked on both sides. And most people who have moya moya, they don't live to learn that they have moya moya. They usually just pass because of the initial stroke. So the fact that he is today, now after 3 years of a lot of physical therapy and working with him OT, and he was in hospice for about a month, he's now walking with a cane, talking normal, and he's just his normal optimistic Cali self, which I'm really, really grateful for. And I do believe that him in that comatose state, he was somewhere. I believe that our consciousness are all connected somehow, and it only makes sense that music is the right way to send a message to your loved ones, or to inspire you. Or we make music as humans to keep going, and we write music about our survival, or how we have lived, or how we've loved. And so I believe music is something that has us all connected, and it is a way that we can all meet. And someday we'll all pass on and we'll all have music, and there's something on the other side. It's just, that's what all these experiences have kind of shown me, is that I've always been kind of like anxiety and always been obsessed with the afterlife and paranormal, and questioning it and wondering why are we here? What is the reason? Why am I going through this pain? Why am I going through this suffering? But we don't know, and that's okay. But we do know that there is something greater, and we are all connected consciously. And I believe that music is absolutely one of those things that keep us bound together to the universe.
We-Boo-Lesque is a production of Victor Devon, White Elephant Burlesque, and We-Burlesque podcast. All stories were provided by the guests in question. For information on them, please visit the footnotes at weburlesquepodcast.com or on your podcast service of choice. This session features Penny Slayne, Batsy Sinclair, and Chichi Peche. All tales are those of the original storytellers. All unique recordings under the heading of We-Boo-Lesque or We-Burlesque are property of White Elephant Burlesque, We-Burlesque podcast, and Victor Devon. All original music is acquired by Pixabay.com with the understanding they are fair use. For more information, please visit WeBurlesquePodcast.com, rate, follow, and subscribe accordingly. Happy Halloween.